The Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Some Pharisees came, and to test Jesus, they asked, "Is it lawful for a husband to divorce his wife?" Jesus answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They said, "Moses allowed a husband to write a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her." But Jesus said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses wrote this commandment for you. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Then, in the house, the disciples asked Jesus again about this matter, and he said to them, "Whatever man divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery." People were bringing little children to Jesus in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the dominion of God belongs. Truly, I tell you, whoever does not receive the dominion of God as a little child will never enter it." And Jesus took them up in his arms, laid his hands on them, and blessed them. The Gospel of the Lord. I must admit, it's really tempting to ignore the first 2/3 of this passage and just move straight to the "let's welcome little children" portion. And for those of us who have been through a divorce, it can strike home in a really painful way. And this text has been used to shame people who are divorced, to force or try to force those in abusive marriages to remain married, and to deny marriage to same-gender couples. So much damage has been done by the misuse of this gospel text and of the Genesis text. So what do we do with it? Do we ignore it? If we do, we run the risk of more people being hurt, shamed, and thinking that God and the church has condemned them, so why even bother? So, let's dig in. In the first chapter of Genesis, which we didn't read this morning, we hear God declaring everything that God has created as good. And on the final day of creation, when humanity is created, as very good. But in Genesis 2, we hear a different version of the creation story. And in this story, there is a moment where God declares something as not good. It is not good for the person to be alone, God says. God's dream for us as human beings is not for us to be alone, but to live in relationship with one another, in community with one another. And so in this story, in chapter 2 of Genesis, God creates all the animals after having created, we call him Adam, but Adam is simply Hebrew Adam for, as Eric teaches, confirmation, dirt boy. That's all it means. And so God, after creating this dirt person, parades all of these animals in front of this person to see if there is a partner for that person. It It's a little humorous, to be honest. One can imagine the first cow walking by and the first person looking and going, well, nope, that's not going to work too well. But I think I'll call you Fred. It's only when God creates another human being that the connection works. And this dream of companionship is a dream of likeness and intimacy, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, of two equals joining together to share life together. Human community started not with differences, but with similarities, with equality, and with mutuality. And when these are the essence of relationship, when equality and mutuality are core to relationships, then there is no reason to restrict them only to marriages between men and women. They apply to all of our relationships, to friendships, to romance, to marriage, and to sexuality. And so when the leaders in the gospel come to Jesus with a question about divorce, we get this callback to Genesis. But when they come to Jesus, they're not coming with a genuine question and a genuine interest in his answer. They are experts in the Torah, the Jewish teachings, and they know the correct answer to their question. In fact, Jesus does what Jesus almost always does. He doesn't answer a question directly. He turns it back. Because they're looking for a way to trap Jesus, either into siding with one particular group or another on their opinion, or I think even more so, trying to get him into the same kind of trouble that John the Baptist wound up with Herod. Just a quick reminder, Herod Antipas married his brother Philip's wife, and John spoke out about this. And we know how that turned out for John, right? So Jesus sidesteps this question, sidesteps this attempt to get him to make a statement that might wind up getting him in trouble with Herod, by first referring them back to their own teaching, to Moses. And they respond saying, well, Moses said a man could write a certificate, and notice, man can write a certificate to divorce his wife. But then, after they have responded, Jesus goes to the heart of the matter and quotes that text from Genesis, not to use it as a legal text, but as a spiritual text. What was God's intention for human relationship, for human community? That we live in mutuality and that we become one, and that no one separates what God has joined together. One writer puts it this way, that we receive each other as equals, as partners, as intimates. That what we are to each other is not a commodity, an object, a scapegoat, or a conquest, but an extension of our own bones and flesh. Companions as essential, as vulnerable, and as worthy of tenderness and protection as our very own bodies. The reality of our world and our lives rarely lives up to this ideal. And Jesus tells the leaders that the reason Moses gave them an option was because of their hardness of heart. And while the ideal may seem naive, idealistic, or unreachable in today's world, It's our human brokenness that creates the problem. Sometimes we enter relationships not even fully aware that we're trying to repair some childhood trauma or trying just to fulfill someone else's expectations or even trying to deny and change our own true nature, because that's what every good Christian does, isn't it? Power plays, manipulation, egotism, betrayal, abuse, and a whole host of other issues can result in a relationship that can no longer survive. And there is grief and there is pain in each of these. I've never known anyone to enter a relationship and a marriage expecting it to fail. And these scriptures are not meant to be weapons that injure us and batter us down. In fact, over the last few weeks, we've heard Jesus teaching about community and about the wide welcome that he offers and that you and I are to offer to his followers. And the closing portion of this text gives us one more example of that welcome and of relationship. Because Jesus doesn't say that only children who are perfect, only children who have earned the privilege should be allowed to come to him. Instead, children who are vulnerable and have nothing to bring but themselves, the good, the not so good, are welcome to him, to come and to be blessed by him. And we are those children. We are these children, whether we have been married for decades, whether we are single, divorced, remarried. There is a place in Jesus' community for each and every one of us. Our pasts don't earn our place, nor do they preclude that place. We come with nothing to our relationship with God, like children who are dependent on other people. And God's relationship with us is truly one of grace. We are welcomed in, we are loved, and we are encouraged to do the same for others. Relationship for humanity is meant to be marked by mutuality and support and by love. God calls us into relationship and for us to welcome into our midst and into our relationships those who are vulnerable. Just as you and I have been welcomed into relationship by Jesus and called his children. God welcomes us, we welcome others. And so may God fill us with love and grace for one another, and may God be centered in our relationships, whether they be friendships or whether they be marriages and partnerships that last a lifetime. God's purpose is for grace and for love to grow, not for judgment and condemnation. Thanks be to God.